thank you, guys. This is always helping with the stage fright, if you want to fight it. I guess you didn't expect an all-women panel in Web3, and who said that there are no women in Web3? Big applause for Kathleen from Tezos and Tegan Klein from Agent Note. We're waiting still for our third panelist, and we're going to start with the questions in a bit. But first, I would like to get a sense of what kind of people we have in the audience. Like, how many people actually work in Web3 at this point? Maybe you can raise your hand. How many of you are thinking about it, jumping into Web3? Great. Pretty much what we expected, actually, right?
Yes.
Hey, nice to have you here as
Better
well,
late than never.
Bradley. So, infrastructure and traffic is a bit challenging at WebSummit, but you made it right. Breathe in, breathe out.
Yeah, it's actually, I think I've probably gone 2 miles just to get here from the,
It is.
from the entrance.
We're starting right on time. I'm going to bring you a bit back in time and maybe make a parallel between Web3 and Web2. So Web3 is often described as the next revolution in the World Wide Web, and which is going to be decentralized. It's going to leverage semantic web, or AR, VR, and cryptocurrencies. Let's not forget them. If we go back in time and look how disruptive Web2 was for certain industries, it literally brought some of them to their existential threat. Do you expect the same thing happening with Web3 now? Bradley, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Brad. I'm co-founder at Unstoppable Domains. We build identity on the blockchain. So yeah, I think totally that's going to happen. I think there's a lot of areas where this is happening. I think we're starting to see it already with NFT art. Not my company, but Christie's and these other famous art marketplaces are auctioning digital art instead of physical art. I think that's a very clear example. We personally are betting that's going to happen with identity, with usernames. Usernames right now are controlled by social media companies primarily, also email companies, and we think that those business models that are built around controlling a user and storing the user's data are going to go away. But I think there's a lot of categories where that's true.
Yeah, I think that the revolution is already happening. It's happening in many different industries, and I think every industry will be impacted by Web3. We've already seen it with decentralized finance. I come from Wall Street, and on Wall Street, I had to go to college and then interview about 30 times with the top banks. And then from there, I had to take my Series 7, my Series 63, and then I was cleared to be an investment banker, which is really to be a market maker on Wall Street. And today, you can do this just by signing up on Uniswap and becoming a liquidity provider without asking anyone's permission. So I think that that's already revolutionizing finance, and as mentioned, is happening in art with NFTs already, and decentralizing organizations with DAOs.
Yeah, and just to, riff on that, I think we're all pretty sympathetic to the pitch, obviously. But if you think about, scarcity on the web and how to enforce that, it's been really difficult to do that historically. And one thing a blockchain does really well is it allows you to basically come to consensus over who owns what in a potentially distrustful environment. And if you think about, the things that you actually value on the web, it is things like your username, your domain, and things like that. And so I think, when people talk about Web3, what they're usually talking about is a knee-jerk reaction to the ad-based model of the web, which we blame for the rise of Meta, Google, all these guys that have become bogeymen for better or for worse. And so the idea is to basically have ownership and shift the balance of power into anyone who can program can now be a market maker. And that's the vision. And we're very far away from kind of the glorious end state. But I think, Unstoppable Domains and a few other companies are clearly paving the infrastructure layer for that, so.
Yeah, I think defining Web3 quickly, it's a brand new platform for truly decentralized applications to live, and we're still decentralizing the Web3 stack. And once that's fully decentralized and integrated, then you can build really cool decentralized applications on top, but we're still in the building the infrastructure phase.
Very early.
So Web3 promises also to somehow release us from the shackles of big tech. And there are currently also those who are basically getting the biggest portion of the advertising budgets. I was wondering, as a marketing person, what would the transition, the shift to Web3 mean for brands? Do you expect that we would be, that users' data will be leveraged in a different way by brands, and it wouldn't be that intrusive as it was in Web 2?
I think it takes a lot for a company that has a ton of power to basically shift things over. I think it has to be seized by people, not necessarily seeded by brands. There's two companies that use the Tezos blockchain for gaming, CCP Games and Unisoft. And what's weird is like you never think of these guys who have basically walled gardens as a business model, seeding power. But if you think that that's where everyone's going based on, user experience, so on and so forth, like you can think about a smart way to be in a middle ground. So I think, basically the smart brands are going to try to experiment with things and going to try to like figure out what this means. But I think it's a hard sell. It kind of has to, seed demand first.
Yeah, I echo that. I think that the data silos are going away, kind of the data honeypots, the locking in users, the locking in developers. That's not welcomed behavior in Web3. And if you try to bring that behavior to Web3, you won't win in this ecosystem. It's really about giving the power, the control, and the ownership back to the users. And there's ways to do that with new token models that didn't exist previously. And tokens are kind of the next evolution of the business model beyond SaaS, and it's more about peer-to-peer as opposed to taking a fee or selling ads on a platform.
Yeah, one thing we're starting to see a little bit are brands that, there's been Nike and there's been a few other kind of big consumer brands that have started to sell NFTs. And I don't know if that's necessarily their future, like digital sneakers or whatever. But I think one of the reasons why they're doing it is they're excited about the data that comes with having wallet information essentially about their users. So I think in the future, you're going to have privacy, but you're also going to have these digital profiles that are available about users that's actually going to make it easier to find the customers, your potential customers in particular. So I think that there's there's ways to see like this customer owns X, Y, and Z item, and therefore they're going to be a good fit for my product. So we're already starting to see some of that, and I think that's just the power of having a public on-chain data set. I think it's going to get used in a lot of different ways for marketing. I haven't really seen any good kind of marketing automation platforms for Web3 crypto stuff. Started to see that come out, so if anybody's starting a marketing automation for a Web3 company, come talk to me afterwards. We're following that space closely, but haven't really seen it materialize fully yet.
So we can expect even more personalization in approaching users from brands. Let's hope that also the marketing managers will get that, because I think same was promised in Web 2, but somehow it was a bit disappointing how it all happened. Now, speaking of business models, can you tell me, which are the ways to draw profit in Web 3, and are they so much different than Web 2? Tegan, maybe you would like to start.
Yeah, double-clicking into tokens as a new business model. So if you look at things like Ethereum, like the graph, they have different incentive mechanisms. And so there are still people providing services and values in these protocols, in these ecosystems. But it's usually in the form of tokens, and those tokens are paid directly. So with the graph, it's a protocol, it's decentralized. So there's no graph company extracting and taking a fee and taking a cut. All of the revenue goes peer-to-peer from the node operators that are organizing data to the users of applications like Uniswap, paying in GRT for the usage of those applications. So that's one example. Bitcoin is another great example of kind of tokens as a business model.
Kathleen, we actually spoke about it backstage. Are the business models that different in Web 3 than in Web 2?
I think it remains to be seen, right? Like, a lot of this stuff is, the limitation is basically the architecture of what you're using as an alternative. To Tegan's point, you've got many different ways to skin the cat. I think it's this concept of Web3, which is, again, mostly a reaction to, like, the sort of big players in the tech space, it's not very well defined writ large. Usually what people mean when they're talking about this is like using a token or some sort of like scarce good in a blockchain-based ledger to like incentivize, using some pecuniary incentive, some sort of behavior attitude, and then there's kind of like layers on top of this. But we've also seen, like, to be candid, like some of the more vanguard applications and either decentralized finance or lending protocols and things like this, like kind of fall on their face. So it's worth noting as a highlight, like it's on the vanguard, and you're going to have failure because that's what happens when there's a ton of experimentation. But ultimately, it's about like shifting power to basically something that's more algorithmically defined and offers pecuniary incentives to basically act differently than you would in the previous models of the web. But that's not always a great thing.
I don't think Web3 business models necessarily mean that you have to have a token as the model. The entire NFT space doesn't function that way. They sell a product which is much more similar to like being an e-commerce company selling shoes or something like that. So I think there's going to be a lot of different types of models, and I think that a lot of them, some of the most successful companies I've seen in the crypto space have just sold products and made money. So like I'm still very bullish on business models that look like that. So I think there's probably going to be a mix. But the thing that's different in the NFT space is that when you're selling a product, you're selling a product that is owned completely by the user. I think Web3 equals ownership. I think that's kind of the key underlying idea. And so you're going to see different versions of that, kind of all built around this idea of ownership.
And I think the reason some brands have kind of edged towards embracing it is actually having everything sit on your servers is almost a liability. I'm thinking of CCP games, like it's almost a tax that they have all of EVE Online in their servers in Iceland. Like it's kind of makes their life easier if they're able to like shift this to a public ledger that everyone maintains based on like some pecuniary incentives. So sometimes it's a bit of a reprieve.
Yes.
From what I assume is like a really odious infrastructure play in their own right.
It's interesting, actually, how we can twist a bit existing business models into the Web3 space, and they become they get like a totally different meaning, especially redefining the idea of ownership. In this sense, I was curious: do you expect that some industries will perform better financially in Web3 than they did in Web2?
I think they already are, right? There's so many projects that, there's more unicorns here at WebSummit that are in the Web3 space than in Web2 this year. And I think within the Web3 space, right now, a lot of what is performing well is at the infrastructure layer. Layer 1s like Tezos and layer 2s like Optimism, Arbitrum, really where you're providing value and people are building on your applications, on your projects where the users are. And right now, we're really seeing a shift more towards fundamentals and away from speculation, which is healthy for the ecosystem.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think Tegan hit the nail on the head there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely. One example that I think about a lot is Reddit. And Reddit is a fantastic product and not an amazing business. No offense to Redditors who are here, but there's like 300 million users, and I think their revenue was like 600 million or something like that. The numbers could be wrong, but it was like $2 a user per year or something like that. So like really, really low monetization given the value that they're providing to society. And now they're starting to sell avatars, and they're starting to, and one of the problems they have is that they don't have good identity on their platform, so they don't actually know how to target ads to those users very well. And I think that from what I'm seeing, they're betting that they're going to be able to first of all, sell products, NFTs to their users in a way that's hyper profitable, and then two, hopefully market directly to their users better. So I think that's one example. There's a whole category of social media companies that are not doing that well with the ad model. So I think those are probably the places to look at least in Web 2. Companies with unsuccessful ad models. I think those unsuccessful ad models and then very, very powerful communities, those are the types of businesses that I think could wind up making a lot more in Web 3 or with Web3 business models than they currently do.
I'm surprised you didn't bring up Twitter, of course.
Yeah, but the problem with Twitter is that they might not do crypto things. They're just going to sell you products for money. I don't know if they're going to be crypto things, but yeah, maybe. Elon's hard to predict.
Do you expect that we will change also the way that we build organizations? I mean, we had legal entities before, but now in the crypto space, especially with this new idea of ownership, organizations become a bit more inclusive, they become a bit more transparent. What is your expectation? How is this going to change the way we build organizations?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess what you're referring to without saying is like DAOs and decentralized, so basically a way of self-organizing to basically have some sort of commons to divvy up something or make decisions. Yeah, I mean, Tezos is a cryptocurrency. It's born of the observation that Bitcoin lacks a mechanism to upgrade itself, and one of the ways that we propose remedying this is having people who own tokens in the network vote on and ratify upgrades to it, and that takes a supermajority. It's like it's got this governance model that's like really dorky and based on like the Republic of Venice. But I digress. All it's to say, like I jokingly refer to Tezos as the original DAO because it's sort of the self-referential organization that everyone has the consent of the governed, and we all agree that this is the canonical version of the blockchain. I think that's a really powerful concept. I think at the end of the day, what this technology does is it like helps people very far away organize with each other and trust each other because they basically shift the balance to an algorithm that it's open source and you can query, right? So you like trust the outcome because you trust the process. And I think that's that fundamental idea like has so many different ways to do self-organization in a much better way. And the internet in some ways like has brought a lot of beauty into the world by allowing people to like feel less lonely and to self-organize. And not that cryptocurrencies have offered the same sort of cuddly cuddly stories, but it's a nice concept that I think if you just break out of the traditional models for business, you can start to think more about self-organization at the web and at scale using a blockchain.
Yeah, I think that there's excuse me. I think that there's an important distinction to make. And when we say decentralization, it doesn't mean that companies are all going away. Companies will just change and shift to exist in the concept of protocols, decentralized protocols. So within the graph ecosystem, there are over 200 companies that exist within the protocol. The thing is that we're giving the power back to individuals, and there's no one company that holds all of the power for themselves. So I think one example that I can share is Playgrounds. It's SaaS built on top of the graph. So it uses the graph as kind of like this database of organized data, but then it serves analytics via SaaS.
Bradley.
Yeah, I'm really excited about what's been happening with open protocols. The way that those are just these kind of decentralized open communities around the world. I think that's a really good, like a really powerful new concept in the world. The other area that seems like it's going really well are sort of like nonprofit initiatives where there's like a pile of money that is then voted on by a group of people who figure out what to do with it. And I think that's actually what most of the DAOs are today. Where I'm a little bit more skeptical is applications or companies being run by DAOs. That's like putting your local school board in charge of your business. So I'm actually less bullish on that than I am, because I think running a company is actually quite a logistically complicated thing. So yeah, I would bet on companies over DAOs for running apps.
100% agree. Most of the DAOs that I've seen function basically like a very bad school project, where one person's doing all the work and everyone else is like complaining about it. So it's very demotivating.
Nonprofit is awesome though, and like I participated in the Constitution DAO. I thought that was cool. There was no way to make money off of it. It was just this kind of like cool, almost charitable type thing. Like they were going to go and display it for the public and things like that. There's also a lot of DAOs that are taking a pile of money from protocols, and then the group is deciding like who to fund in order to help an ecosystem. That's very different than running Aave protocol or whatever. Like those people don't run Aave protocol. Those people can't actually impact the business so much, but they can vote on who gets grants basically. So I think that's like a nonprofit. I think is kind of the secret superpower of DAOs right now.
Yeah, it's all about shifting the way we coordinate online and incentivizing different behavior. Constitution DAO is a great example of that, where everyone wanted to buy the Constitution, so they gathered together on the internet from all across the world to try and buy the Constitution. And that was built on decentralized infrastructure. So it was built on the Graph network, and GRT queries kind of flew through the background, which is important because you don't want any one company to be able to deplatform you. We saw with Facebook, the APIs got shut down early days because they realized that they could create an ad model. And so within Web3, it's important that there's no one company that can decide to deplatform someone else.
Well, one of the downsides to Bradley's point about like companies over DAOs, basically for profit things, like, when you see the Constitution DAO deliberate how much they can bid, Ken Griffin just comes in and says, okay, +1, and just tolerates it. So like secrecy is actually a really important part of like being strategic in a business. And like the flip side of DAOs is like it is transparent, but like almost to a fault sometimes. So there's clearly a happy in between, and
The last thing I would say is that profits are not evil. And I think there's a little bit of a narrative in the crypto space right now that profits are evil, and that instead you should have a token that doesn't actually represent a percentage of your profits instead of profit. I think that's maybe a trend that got a little overblown, and I'm going to take the other side of that bet where I can.
do you think that kind of falls into the like sort of decentralization theater?
Absolutely, and I think that no one actually knows what they mean when they say decentralization. We wrote a piece on this at one point, and we found, I think, like 17 different factors that you could consider in terms of decentralization. So no one actually knows what anyone's talking about when they're talking about decentralization. I certainly don't know. So I think that the conversation gets really confused, but I think there's a secret. And the secret is what everyone really wants to do with their app is they want to give everybody in this room a token and a percentage of revenue share. That's what everyone actually wants to do. And guess what? That's illegal. So the thing that everyone actually wants to do that would be the fairest is illegal. So everything else is us kind of trying to like stick pieces together to try to make something approximate to that. But we can't actually do the thing that would be the most fair because of SEC laws. So.
But I think we need to look at why people think profits are evil, right? If you look at the web today, the incentivization that happens is on paying attention to your phone as long as possible, and that's destroying relationships, right? And so you have this problem of the algorithm trying to keep your attention for as long as possible to extract from you as much as possible and making the user the product. So I think in Web3, it's all about changing the incentives so that we incentivize positive things, and it's more of a positive sum as opposed to a zero-sum game.
I think we're talking about monopoly. I don't think we're actually talking about business models. I think we're talking about monopolies. I think monopolies are bad, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the business model itself is the problem. I think advertising is going to continue. I just think it's going to be user-owned data, so the user is opting in, but I don't actually think that advertising is going to go away. I think advertising could actually just get 1,000 times better.
I agree with that.
I see we touched on a very, very interesting topic. I love panels where speakers don't necessarily agree with each other, and then they start jumping into into another conversation. Because we don't really have much time, and I have so many questions, I'll have to pick one which is going to probably let us finish on a bit high note. I think we need that, especially in the times of a recession and economic downturn. So. Yeah, it's a tricky one, but what about funding? So we know that startups, the way that they're actually usually built, they pretty much depend on venture capital. And at this point, especially generalist VC funds are a bit hesitant in funding this kind of projects. How as a startup founder, do you proceed with that?
Funding has definitely tapered off from where it was previously, but I actually think it's healthy. So it's coming back to fundamentals. Valuations are kind of coming down lower, but there are a lot of crypto-based funds that are very active and involved. Multicoin is an example. Reciprocal Ventures is another example. And then there are tier one VCs in the traditional space like Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia, even Tiger Global is now involved within the crypto space. So I think they're still actively looking for deals.
I mean, the trad VCs may be going away, but that's fine. They'll come back during the next bull run, and the true believers will still be here. And it's a lot more fun when it's only true believers anyway, so that's the beauty of bear markets.
The tourists are out.
And can you have some tips for, let's say, if we have full-stack developers also here in the audience, how do you enter the Web3 space? How do you learn to deal with a bit and slightly different technology stack that you have in Web3? What is the best approach here to build a app?
If you go to edgeandnode.com, there's an image of the Web3 stack and a blog that kind of walks you through it, building in a decentralized way. So you can check that out. Also, Natter Dabbit has a lot of great videos on how to build within the Web3 space. But I think the best thing to do is what you're all doing today, coming to events, talking to people, asking questions.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Good approach. Thank you. It was a very interesting panel, and I hope that, especially for those who are not familiar that much with the Web3 space, they kind of get a sense of the opportunities which are hiding there. Do you think that Web3 is going to kind of be complementary to Web2, or it's going to totally shift like we had the revolution before? Do you see them happening in a parallel way?
Depends on the industry, for sure. I think it seems to me that companies are more aware of this transition than maybe they were. I wasn't in business during the Web 1 transition, but it seems like there was a lot more resistance to e-commerce in the 1990s than there is to NFT or crypto business models in amongst Web 2 companies. It seems like there's a consensus across the business world that this is the future. So I think we're going to see a lot of Web 2 crossover successes. Social media companies are an example that look to be doing quite well.
Yeah, Web3 is an expanding industry with a lot of innovation. So I would say if you're thinking about making the jump into Web3, it's a great time to do that.
So now is the perfect timing to jump into the Web3. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.